Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a terrific day ahead of you. In today's video, in today's version of Everything You Need, a slightly different one to the ones we've been having as of late. Instead of this super specific topic to start us off, I'm actually going to be looking at the midfielders as a whole, because I think there are so many interesting players in that department. So many I'd like to pick and like to have in my team that I think it'd be great just to go through all of those guys. And then I'll do something similar for the forwards as well, because I think there are a lot of interesting discussion points. The biggest team at the moment, I'd say, within FPL, the talk of the town, are Arsenal. So they have their own dedicated section, as well as Captaincy, and a touch on Wildcard and Free Hit. No drafts in this video for reasons I shall discuss later. So that's what you've got to look forward to today. If you enjoy at any point, or have enjoyed at any point in the past, a like, a hype, a subscribe on the video and to the channel would be greatly appreciated. Like I said, have a terrific day and enjoy. To start with, 11 midfielders, 11 that I think are so interesting in their own right when it comes to the game. And I'm going to start with potentially my new favorite. I wouldn't say he's the best, but maybe my new favorite in terms of how exciting he could be. And that is Anthony Gordon, who might just be bouncing off the bottom. I've spoken about in an increasing frequency this season, not trying to time the bottom and rather just getting on that momentum, that upward momentum early on, but not trying to hit that point exactly. At times it may be appropriate, but for most scenarios, just trying to avoid that. And Anthony Gordon was someone who, up until recently, and maybe even today, had not scored a lot of goals. He'd not scored a lot of goals at all. And I'm pretty sure he had gone 19, 20 games without one. But following a brace in the Champions League last night, and in addition to that, a pretty decent performance against Arsenal. I thought the soft signs were there. I thought he looked a little bit sharper. With Newcastle's fixtures coming up, with him being at a fairly affordable price point, with him being on penalties now full stop because Alexander Isak has departed, I think his prospects could be really good. I'm not really worried about his expected minutes being affected by Harvey Barnes. I think at times maybe Barnes comes on the right, but I feel like Eddie Howe really, really likes Gordon. And there'll even be a game maybe here or there that Voltemada doesn't start and Gordon could play through the middle. But otherwise, I think he's going to play on the left. And with those fixtures, with how good Voltemada is at dropping in and then linking, if he's able to do this Firmino type role where he can drop in and Gordon can function as a runner off him, and maybe they can get a little bit more of a passer in that left-hand side of midfield, / Lewis Hall on the left. And that's even more likely with Livramento's injury now. I think you could see him do really well. So he's certainly one to consider. Foden's just got an enormous ceiling in the next few games. I mean, Brentford away, he scored a brace last season and a hat-trick before. And just in general, that type of game, I'd say it certainly suits him. Then you've got Everton after, and Everton who have been decent defensively, but I wouldn't say they've been unbelievable. So again, something to consider there. And then after that, it's Villa, and dependent on what type of form Villa are in at the moment and the injuries they have, that could also be a good game for him, right? So with him, you've always got the prospect, where the fixture's decent and the matchup's decent, of a huge haul, right? Of that brace realistically being there and maybe even a little bit more. And I do think that could be around the corner. And as such, if I was to gamble on him, or someone was gambling on him, I really wouldn't mind it. And I wouldn't call it a gamble. I think I'd call it a calculated risk at absolute worst. And whilst he's spoken about later, I'm going to bring in a little bit of analysis now. Tijani Reinders, if you look at those games, they're not ones where I expect, maybe aside from the Brentford one and the Villa one to an extent, but with how much City like to dominate the ball, I think it's atypical for the other team to be able to get out the block too much. But what I essentially expect with Reinders is for him to receive the ball a lot in these attacking positions when the block's already quite settled and static. And something I've spoken about a few times now is how in those situations, I think his temperament's just a little bit off. He's so snappy with it. And he tries to force it a little bit too much. And I actually think the games, for example, the Wolves game, you see his 2 returns, both in transitional situations. Likewise with the Arsenal one. The one against United that he should have had, the goal, was again in that situation. Those I think he's more suited to. Now, he could have those against Brentford and Villa, but a lot of the time they'll be static in the block. And I think they'll be very wary of his threat, Doku's threat, Foden's threat, and then obviously especially Haaland's threat in transition. So there could be a swing here, and I think it could be a fairly sizable one, especially with Foden's ceiling. It's not to say Reinders can't return, but it is something to consider. That's not to say he can't return against the block. I'm just saying overall I think that he has a little bit of a weakness there. Then moving on to the Manchester United midfielders. These guys are really interesting. because on paper, they should actually be really good options. Like you take Bruno, for example, penalties, which we'll come on to, Defcon, and some open play threat. Mbeumo and Cunha, both at 8 million, both with their quality, both with the way that they're not platform great in real life, but for FPL, in terms of getting a moment here or there, they should be pretty decent. But one thing I'd say with Man United is, yes, they have not been good in so many regards, but I also think they've got a little bit unlucky. Again, not trying to time the bottom, so probably wouldn't jump on them. Probably wouldn't. But with Sunderland at home, and I still think Sunderland have got a bit lucky to be where they are. You make your own luck, but nonetheless. This could be a game where United win like 3-0, right? 3-1. They could even score maybe 4. And if they do, you would just have to anticipate that one of these guys is not only going to haul, but could haul quite big. And you'd want a piece of that. And then even Liverpool after, like, it looks like a bad game on paper, but Liverpool have such a weakness in defensive transition at the moment. And we can actually talk at a later point why that may be. I've read some analysis and looked at some things, thought of some things, and I think there may be one key factor there for it. But returning back to the United mids, with those two fixtures, like even the Liverpool one and then the Brighton one after, and then the fixture slightly improved, I think they could do quite well. And with Cunha, for example, he's got so much quality. I think he's largely fixture-proof, both against opposition and the conditions. And with his quality, he's got such a high ceiling that if he does get a little bit of luck and the team gets a bit of luck, I think at 8 million, he could be a Foden-type asset, but maybe even more reliable. Mbeumo, I'd say, has a little bit less quality in this particular system to be able to deliver returns, but he's obviously still got a lot, still fairly fixture-proof, can be the runner in those games where you have some space in behind and are more transitional in nature, right? So if he can get a little bit of luck, and more so the team, then again, he could be really good. And he might have penalties, right? Bruno has missed 2 out of the last 3. Maybe it's last chance saloon, but maybe he just gives Mbeumo the next one. And on Bruno Fernandes, at 9 million, you are getting Defcon, which is such a floor raiser, and it's really nice for him. But with the doubt around penalties and the reduced open play threat through the system, and the fact he's not playing particularly well in this position, maybe if you are going to go for United mid, you actually give up the floor of the Defcon and you look to attack Cunha and Mbeumo, especially with the fixtures coming up, and especially in Game Week 7. And then Yankuba Minter is someone who's looked a lot sharper this season. I think last season we saw a lot of these moments and a lot of these flashes, but I wouldn't say he had this ruthlessness to his game. And I still think it's something he needs to improve, and I'd still say it's a mental thing, but he does look sharper in that aspect. And with him, he can do it against the big sides, right? Which is why I say inverse FDR, because Brighton is so good in those big games, and he's got the weapons to be able to hurt them. But also then in the lesser games, you can call it, against the worse opposition, to phrase it one way. I wouldn't call it lesser games. That's not what I meant. I'd say against the worse opposition, he can still return, right? And whilst they're not optimal conditions for Brighton to do so, as they've showed, he's still good enough to do so. I'd say quite a good floor. The ceiling maybe not as much, just because he needs to hit that next level of ruthlessness. But at 5.9 could be a very interesting enabler for yourself. So some things to consider on those guys. Now, you may have noticed that in the last slide, I said there would be 11 midfielders discussed. And there were 6 on there, but only 4 on this. And that is because I forgot Iliman Ndiaye. And he's come to the mind quite recently. So I'll speak about him first. And I'll put this in the chapter title so you don't miss it if you want to hear my thoughts about him. I am slightly concerned. The thing about him that makes it really hard to sell is he has so much quality that I know in any given game, he can just produce a couple moments, and I'm, as an owner or a non-owner, you'd be looking at a 13, 14, 15 pointer. Then with his Defcon capabilities, the floor's pretty good. But I can't anticipate him getting Defcon like every game or even every other game. I think it'll be less than that. So if I'm not really expecting attacking returns, I would have to go somewhere where I do really well to beat him by a considerable margin, but it's still maybe worth considering. And the fixtures now, I always looked at the fixtures and I thought, yeah, first 6, really solid. But after that, not as much. And they've got Palace, right? Really, really good defensive side, as I'll come on to with Saar. And then their fixtures, on the FDR at least, appear tougher, but Palace is one of the hardest you can have. I would say against Palace, he could play in the middle because there's no Dewsbury Hall there. So it's like, okay, what do you do? And then you can play Tyler Dibbling on the right. He could do something where he plays like McNeil in the middle, Ndiaye on the right, McNeil on the right, Ndiaye in the middle, and so on, right? Maybe even move James Garner up. But I personally think that he's going to go Dibbling on the right, Ndiaye in the middle. And if he does, I would say his likelihood of output increases. And this is where I actually think he should be playing this team anyway. And then he becomes a better option attacking wise. But still, Everton have a few issues in attack. I still think Barry's really important over Beto, just being able to link for the striker to be able to link with Grealish and the 10 and the right wing. I think he brings that more than Beto does. And without that, and the pivot that they have, the progression isn't great. You're not getting too much out of the fullbacks. Quite reliant on Grealish carrying to get you up the pitch, and then you have to create from there. But when the team's already in a block, his real expertise is being able to take the ball in a little pocket, dribble, and then score from there, right? And I think with the way they're attacking at the moment, this is harder to envisage. Maybe when he plays at 10, but he might not play there too often because I think Moyes really likes Dewsbury Hall. And he's 6'5", so he's not expensive, but he's blocking one of the spots where there's a lot of other options. So something to consider. And I am looking to sell maybe soon. And if I go on a wildcard, I don't think I'll have him. Ismail Assar is just a really good player in a really good team who's got goal threat, who's got assist threat, whose fixtures from GameWeek 10 are good. But even beforehand, with how good these guys are, with the variety of situations that they are competent in, he can do it. And he's only 6'4". Not in height, in price. So for me, I would really, really consider this. And as an Ndiaye replacement, I think he could be great. And I wouldn't be surprised if he scores against Everton or at least returns. Enzo Fernandez is interesting. He should stand out because Liverpool at home, I don't think is a bad game from an attacking standpoint, especially for us. And we'll come on to our attack now and in a bit. But even after that, Forest away, I mean, under Ange, that's a cool attacking fixture. Then you've got Sunderland at home, again good. Spurs away, not as much, but still exploitable to an extent. And then it's Wolves and Burnley. So the fixtures actually look quite good for him. And if Palmer is out for a while, playing this box-to-box role, but also as the most attacking midfielder in a lot of situations, you would expect him to get returns. When I watched Chelsea, and I was actually at the bridge for the game against Benfica, I really do have concerns over our attack at the moment. I don't love the dynamics. And I think also we lack a little bit of quality, a little bit of superstar quality to be able to score goals and quite a few goals quite consistently. So what I would say with him is I wouldn't be expecting a haul. I can see a floor being pretty good, especially over an extended period of time, fairly consistent, 5-6, 5-6. But to get a haul, I just don't fancy it at the moment because one thing that's having to happen a lot is JP drops deep, but then he doesn't have a runner off him, so maybe he carries, and his final pass isn't great. The wingers that we have, they're not super ruthless in terms of their goal-scoring ability as well, so it's hard to generate assists there. So it's really a lot of box crashing with him to get returns, but outside of that, it's going to be a bit harder, right? Because it's not even like those passings the wingers resulting in goals. So, and they play a little bit wider than traditional, I guess even traditional wingers used to come inside a little bit more. So that's something to consider. I don't love it. I can see him doing all right, but I don't love it. I think if it does go well, you'd get a bit lucky, especially with the way we're attacking at the moment. Rangers, I'm not going to speak about again much because I did so in the Foden section. Probably should have paired him with him there. I would say as a result of this particular block, it's unrealistic it's unrealistic for him to hit the ceiling fairly often. And that's something I would consider. And lastly, Lucas Paquetá. This could go really well, I think. At 5'9", he could be an amazing enabler because his fixtures from Game Week 8 are really solid, are really, really solid. And with James Ward-Prowse out the side, he took set pieces, and he's on penalties, and he's got some chance for DEFCON. And the thing that I have been banging on about for so long with West Ham, and especially in the way you want to platform him, is sort your pivot out, sort your pivot out, sort your pivot out. You've added the physicality of Masanga, and you've added that of Matthias Fernandes. Same with the running power. They can progress and pass as well, so it's not like he has to constantly rotate in and help with progression as well. He can function a bit more as a 10/8. I think that's so helpful for him. And now his open play threat will increase as well, right? And that's how, for example, the out possession improvements help in attack. And he's just got a lot of quality. So with him, in a moment, you may get something. With some other guys who have a lot of good things on paper but don't have this superstar quality, their returns are limited to certain situations. But he'll make you something out of nothing once in a while. So at 5'9", I think this could be a really good option from Game Week 8. And you know what? Maybe they score against Arsenal, but I don't think you'd want to play anyone away at the Emirates unless your name's Erling Haaland or maybe Salah. Another midfielder who's not spoken about in that section is Bukayo Saka, and I'll also touch on Eberechi Esse in this category. But we're going to start with the Arsenal defence. I've seen some positivity surrounding Yuri and Timber as an option. For me, I still think that Arsenal are a better side with Ben White in it, but it doesn't really matter what I think in this case. It matters what Mikel Arteta thinks. And whilst Timbers is probably his first choice, and I think that's fairly apparent, I would expect White to come in and start games here or there. And you don't really want this issue when you're paying this much for a defender, especially when it's blocking an Arsenal spot, especially in this period. And it's not like his attacking threat is like out of this world. He's also got set piece threat, which helps it and just boosts his floor and ceiling, right? But I don't think you need to take the gamble, especially when the other four are on offer. Gabriel is just very, very, very solid. It's funny because during the Newcastle game, and I was thinking this during the City game, and then I thought more during the Newcastle game, I was like, oh, they've changed their set pieces, and other teams have changed their approach against Arsenal set pieces, and they're not as well geared for him. And then he scores in the 96th minute. I was literally thinking that beforehand. But still, I stand by the point. If you actually look at and I spoke about this in transfer runs, look at the first 5 game weeks from last season and this season, compare the set pieces, and Gabriel doesn't look as much of a threat. And the threat is more spread. Saliba, Calafiori, Timber. And that means that if you don't go there, you can actually maybe get away with that and outscore him by going elsewhere. However, his expected minutes are so solid alongside Saliba. You know he's never getting dropped or rotated unless he absolutely needs to. Obviously, he went off tonight with a knock, but I still think he starts. And maybe they take him off around 75, but he'll get past 60. And he's still got, obviously, the best box threat out of any of them. It was more the point that it's just not quite as good. I would just say he's very, very, very solid, as it says on the screen. And I don't think you necessarily need to gamble against him unless you're extremely confident in Calafiori's expected minutes. Game in, game out, game in, game out. Saliba's very solid. By all metrics, he's better on DEFCON as well. Not quite as good in the box, or not really as good as in the box as Gabriel, but still some set piece threat. And I would say he's slightly underrated with the fact that he's better on DEFCON. I'd also say Calafiori is underrated. Comes in cheaper at 5'7" instead of 6'2" for Gabriel. Not only does he have the set piece threat, again, not to the extent that Gabriel does, but he also has open play threat. But then again, little Seabit, and you've got Miles Lewis-Skelly there, who I don't personally think should come into the side at the moment. I prefer Calafiori, and I think Arteta does at the moment as well, so you can expect him to continue. But maybe you have this one game that you miss, and you probably don't even want that. But I still think overall, expected minutes really good, and I would say he's underrated. If I had to choose out of them, I think I'd probably still go Gabriel, just long-term, for the fact that there's a bit more goal threat. A decent amount more goal threat than Saliba and more than Calafiori, even though Calafiori's got the open play threat. But Gabriel's Seabit over Calafiori essentially pulls me that way. And the expected minutes. So yeah, that's how I'd go with Gabriel. With Raya, I prefer Pope in goal. However, structurally, he's actually quite useful because it allows you to have another very Seabit focused defender. So, for example, let's say you went Gabriel Calafiori, right? And you have a 4 million defender. You can go Senesi and Anderson, but then you can't get like a Richards. Maybe you get a Henderson, but you can't get a Richards. Whereas this way, Calafiori, who doesn't have that much going from in the DEFCON department, you can get Richards, Anderson, Senesi. So the fourth one gets Seabit whilst you still have the Arsenal defender. So there's something to consider with that. And obviously the price difference as well for the Arsenal assets. And lastly, I just had a mad case of David Joao there. And lastly, Saka and the attacking assets. With some luck, I think, like it says on the screen, I think Saka could be amazing for you. I was really impressed by Gyökeres's performance against Newcastle. But one thing with him is it just doesn't seem like it's fully clicked for him in front of goal. And we did discuss a few things about how his mechanics were maybe not the best suited ever to come in and be a great goal scorer instantly. Or maybe at any point. And with that being the case, and I also think that with maybe Marino knocking about, the fact you can play Trossard up top a little bit, his expected minutes aren't always going to be 90. And he started against Olympiacos and Newcastle, whereas, like, for example, Saka and Rice got a rest. I think he'll start on Saturday, I'm pretty sure. I just don't think he'll necessarily get 90. And I'd say his floor's lower, but also his ceiling might be a little bit lower. If he's not able to tap into this form where he's in this ruthless streak, even getting 1 might be quite hard, never mind 2. Whereas with Saka and all the routes to points you have, not just in terms of like open play, but then set pieces, probably not penalties, but he was holding the ball against Newcastle. So maybe. And the set pieces, not just in terms of like free kicks, but also corners. And then you have so many different open play routes, right? Cut in and shoot, cut in and cross, go on the outside and cut back, and so on and so on. Whereas Gyökeres is a little bit more in transition, hitting the channels in behind, and when it's not there against blocks, maybe a bit harder because he's not the biggest aerial threat either. You could see a scenario where Saka just returns quite consistently, and maybe you hit a couple hauls with some luck. And with Gyökeres' low floor, and maybe the fact that he's not in this ruthless streak, for that 0.8, see him outscoring him by quite a bit. And I don't think this is impossible. So as a differential player, I actually really like it. I would say he's definitely the better asset in isolation. Even with the 0.8 taken into consideration, I think Saka's being a bit underrated. And Eze is not spoken about here, but for me, it's just with Odegaard being back in the captain and the fact that Arteta loves him, I find it very difficult to justify, because when he plays on the left, if he doesn't want to take Odegaard off, he's never taking Rice off. And let's say for the game state, he doesn't want to take Zubimendi off either, then like Trossard's Eze's going to get a fair few 70s, and the goal threat isn't going to be as big on the left as it would in the middle. So as much as I think he should start every game instead of Odegaard, I don't think that will happen. And for me, I wouldn't when he blocks a spot in the midfield, which is clearly packed with options. Now, 2 slides on the forwards. I'll start with Joao Pedro, and I was his biggest supporter pre-season. I many a time called him the best forward in the game, and he's done really well so far, especially for the price. I guess it's just a couple blanks, and it doesn't look like that or feel like that, but he's done really well for the price. However, as I discussed in the Enzo Fernandez section, I'm not so confident in our attack at the moment. We don't really look like we're getting goals from wingers, so you can't generate assists from that fashion. When he's carried from slightly deeper areas, I don't trust his final pass enough, and I think there have been enough instances of that this season. Just look at the Brighton game as an example. He's also carrying a bit of a knock, so he's definitely not 100% fit, and that was the reason he's not called up to the Brazil squad. And we don't have this superstar attacking quality to unlock us in a moment when we're struggling. And I think if a side plays us and they just block well, I think we could be in trouble. And I'm really not too bullish on us at the moment at all. So with that being said, and the fact there's other options that I'm going to go and speak about, I don't think you need to have him. Now, from Game Week 8, or even Game Week 7, the fixtures are pretty good. But I would say with all the things that I've discussed, his ceiling's massively reduced. And if it just so happens that he goes on a bad run of form, or we go on a bad run of form, which I don't think is completely unlikely, then the door really is really open with other good options for you to cash in. So maybe don't sell him this week, but be very cautious of keeping him. And that's what I'd say. And I'd say you can be a bit ruthless with him. And you can always get him back. At his price point, he's very, very attainable and reachable again. Something to consider. Bowen is quite the opposite. I would say whilst Joao Pedro and Chelsea are trending down, he's trending up, as are West Ham. Similar price, same price by 0.1, aside from JP. And I think he might just be back on the menu. The fixtures game week 8 to 11 are really good. One thing with Bowen is every single season, he comes good. And you look at his stats at the end of the season, and they're very solid, irrespective of the conditions that he's been functioning in. He's already got 3 and 6, and now the conditions have improved. 3 and 6 is really good, especially with what he's been dealing with within that team. New manager bounce, 3 home fixtures in 8 to 11 as well. I think he could do well. And I think you could see a haul in there. He's obviously good when he scores for bonus. I like it a lot. And I think this is certainly something to consider. Probably something that's going a bit under the radar. Strand Larson, he played 84 minutes against Spurs. Really good sign that he's come back and he's close to being able to play 90. Even if he gets 80 in the next 3 games, you'll take it when it's Brighton at home, Sunderland, and Burnley. I like that a lot. He's also cheap. He could be quite a decent enabler. I guess it's somewhat enabling at that price, right? And I don't know why they ease capital there. That was an accident. And with the fact that they got their first point against Spurs, right? Yeah, they conceded 94th minute. But the fact it was a pretty decent performance, especially in comparison to what they've been putting up. And they got a point. I think there's some positive momentum that they'll take going into the game. So, underrated option, in my opinion. And then Watkins. even after Burnley, depending on your squad state, I really don't think you need to sell him. Look, Burnley at home, you're not selling him for, right? Great fixture, and he's just scored. But he's a very, very good player with unique capabilities to hurt the big teams, right? I remember the game at the Emirates last season. It isn't normal for a striker to be able to give Saliba and Gabriel that hard of a time and play that well. So even in these bigger games, as long as Villa click, even to an extent, he's always going to be in the money. He's always got a chance to return. And for those owners, I would say you don't need to ship him out. He can do well even in these tough fixtures because he's quite simply just that good. And look at the hype around him at the start of the season. And I don't think that should be completely taken away following just 5 bad weeks. And you know what? He's catching up to some of the forwards now with that 9-pointer. And who knows, maybe another goal against Burnley and all of a sudden he's right on their tail. 3 more forwards to wrap up on for this section. Firstly, Jean-Philippe Mateta. Similar to Ange, I would say he's been a bit unlucky so far. Easily could have returned more against Liverpool. Yeah, okay, a couple of times his fault, but a couple of times Alisson was just amazing. He also now has Eddie Nketiah there. So those midweek games, he doesn't have to play 90. You can share his workload. He'll be fitter for the weekend. Sarr's also back. That will increase both his goal and assist threat. Palace, like I've spoken about, are just really, really good. And I think we need to look at them as a top 4 side, as a seriously good side who are competing not only for top 4, but you know what? They should be feeling like, all right, we can get third here. Like we really can. With some of the other sides struggling a bit. And why not? Why not? I would say with him, the next 3, they don't look great, but with how good Palace are, and the quality that he's got, and the fact he's got penalties, I don't think they're the end of the world. And you know what, with Everton, I don't think they've been superb defensively. Bournemouth are exploitable to an extent. It's just Arsenal that makes it look a lot worse before the fixtures turn. But if you can look past that fixture or bench him for that fixture, I think he's a really good option at his price, especially with Nketiah back now to share that workload midweek. Isak, I just wouldn't. I wouldn't. Even if he's like completely fit to play 90, he hasn't clicked in that side. I think Ekitike has been better than him in that Liverpool side, nor of Liverpool, and they've looked far off it. And the fixtures aren't bad. They're not great though either. But he's just so expensive. And as I've shown, there's so many options in this category, but also, and we haven't even spoken about Haaland, but also in the midfield category, where if you wanted to go 3-5-2 with cheaper options who arguably have a higher ceiling and higher floor than Isak at the moment, you can just go and reinvest the money elsewhere and then just have a really strong squad overall, / really strong 11. But I think introducing a 10.5 asset when you're not going like 0 of Haaland and Salah, for me, it doesn't work, especially when the ceiling's not there. It doesn't look like he's going to score a brace. It doesn't even really look like he's going to definitely score in a game. So I would avoid for now. When he comes good, then we can discuss, but not now for me. And then lastly, Voltemada. Very good player. Really impressed by what I saw against Arsenal and very good fixtures. However, for FPL specifically, I can see William Osula, 70th minute sub. Gordon goes into the middle like around the 70th minute. He doesn't have penalties. And I would say with the play style that he has, more so dropping in as opposed to running in behind and looking to link and be a bit more associative, mid-ish ceiling as opposed to that high ceiling. And I think where there are some other options who boast that, you might not want to go here. Not a bad option. Definitely not bad. I just wouldn't say it's like the option that's going to really propel you, given the ceiling. That's about it. But he's got a lot of things going for him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he consistently does a very good job, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, fairly consistently. I cut the recording there, but one thing I did want to say and emphasize is that I meant a medium ceiling, like I said, but not a low ceiling. I think I made it out that way a little bit in that section, but he still accumulates enough chances, or looks like he's going to accumulate enough chances to at times score. So I would say a medium ceiling, not a low one like I might have made out. You may have been expecting a wildcard or free hit draft. And the reason they're not in this video is I still want a little bit more time before team selection to have a good idea and essentially make some form of a decision as to which way I'm going to go. The thought has entered my mind, especially in a calmer state, maybe not to play a chip this game week. And I've probably reduced the likelihood of going for a free hit and increased that of going for a wildcard. The free hit draft remains very, very similar to what it would be. It would essentially be Haaland, Watkins, Foden, Cunha, Mbeumo, Gordon, Saka, Gabriel Calafiori, Dorgu Martinez. Now, you can't afford that. You'd be about 2 million off. So I'd make one downgrade, right? Even if that's like just going with one Arsenal defender and then going Calafiori down to like a concert, and then I'd find the 0.8 from somewhere, right? Maybe just downgrade a mid. That's probably what I'd have to do. Not the end of the world, but it'd be like that type of structure. However, the wildcard, which I'm becoming increasingly likely to play, as I've shown in this video, there's so many good options, so many options I like. I'd have to account for the fixture swings down the line and so on. I want a little bit more time before I showcase a draft because I'd want to be confident in it and I want you to be getting what I think is the best draft. And I'd like a little bit more time for that, essentially. Lastly, a topic that one we have is usually a lot more interesting and in depth and a little bit harder to decide. But with this form and the conditions that Brentford present, I don't think I can go past Erling Haaland this week. I don't mind it, right? For example, I personally wouldn't go for an Arsenal player at home to West Ham. Saka could do it, and I'd say of all of them, he's the one I probably would go for. But under Nuno, they'll be more secure, and they've got that spread of output there. So I'll be a little bit more cautious there. But I don't mind it if you go Saka. Then when you go to United players, I don't mind an Mbeumo, but specifically Acuna if I had to pick a United player, just because I think he's got the skill set to really exploit this. I know it says Burnley, it's meant to say Sunderland, my apologies. This side and what Sunderland put up, I'd say he's probably the best suited out of all of them. And with so much quality, you can expect at some point a mega haul from him. However, obviously, he still hasn't returned. Again, not trying to time the bottom and get him out of his unlucky streak. And likewise, United just aren't getting too lucky, nor playing particularly well at the moment. And they've obviously got system issues. I do think that there's a capacity for them to score 3-4 past Sunderland, though. And if I had to like bet on the game, I would bet on them to win at least by 2 goals. And then you've got other options. And one thing we haven't spoken about in this video really is Liverpool. And they could hurt us. They could really, really hurt us. I was watching the game and I was speaking to my friend who was sitting next to me. And I was just thinking, if in some of those situations, instead of Benfica, if it was Liverpool and if it was Salah and Szoboszlai on the right, they would have hurt us. And I can see if they just have a good day, right, and they're just ruthless on it, they could score quite a few passes, especially because we are going to play in a more open style than, for example, Burnley did in game week 3 or 4, whichever one it was. So that's, again, something to consider. But I think he could do really well this week. He's just not in form, and Slot's not really platformed him in the best way so far. And again, you probably wouldn't want to time the bottom on that. But the conditions in terms of the opposition and us are there. Watkins at home to Burnley, I don't mind it at all. I just think with Haaland's ceiling and his form, bit of an unnecessary risk. But if you want to take it out, I don't mind it. Foden, for the fact that it's quite a nice matchup as well for him. And if you wanted to go for the mid and essentially cover Haaland or try and take him on with his own teammate, whereby, maybe Haaland just misses out on the day, I don't mind. And then Gordon, because Forest just might provide them Newcastle the conditions to really hurt them, and he may walk away with another brace as such, and he's got penalties. But saying all that, I'm very likely to play it on the big man. I just think the number of transitions that game could have, relatively speaking, probably too many that you'd want against Erling Haaland, the space behind, his form, and the fact that there'll just be space in general for City to play and really play. Even Brentford will go 5-3-2, but I'm just not sure it's enough to stop him. I think they'll be good. So I'm expecting some goals in that game. And you know what? I think him being a bit angry following tonight's draw is probably an even better thing. Maybe instead of scoring a brace this time, he'll score a hat-trick to make sure it gets done. That is all she wrote for this one, ladies and gentlemen. The next time you see me for a team selection, one of these 2 chips may very well be active. In the meantime, I hope you have a terrific day. If at any point you enjoyed the video or have done so in the past, for any of the other content, a like, a hype, a subscribe would all be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much and enjoy your day. Goodbye.